So welcome everyone to the Path of Awakening Buddhist Center course. Let's bow in first. So we're working our way through the profound treasury of the Ocean of Dharma by Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. We're in volume 3, and tonight we're going to be discussing chapter 18, which is all about the Trikaya and other things, and the 8 consciousnesses. I'm going to make an announcement that you'll also be getting an email about. We're going to take a break in a couple of weeks from the Profound Treasury and go instead into a book which I think you'll find really excellent, Trikaya Rinpoche's book, Mind at Ease. It's right here. And it's a terrific book which I think will give you a lot of understanding about the different approaches in the Vajrayana and in Buddhism altogether, as well as a basic understanding of Mahamudra meditation, the great symbol meditation. And Michael and I have looked at it. We really like this book. I encountered it at the Rime Society. They were teaching it there, teaching it very fast. We're going to be going through it more slowly and methodically. So if you want to prepare and cut, but I think not this next week, but the week after, we're going to probably start Mind at Ease by Traleg, T-R-A-L-E-G, Kapgon Rinpoche. I won't bother spelling it all for you, but you'll be getting an email shortly. So tonight, I'm going to start out talking about the Trikaya, and then Michael's going to take over and talk some more about the Trikaya and also about the 8 consciousnesses. So the idea is that the Trikaya literally means Trikaya, 3 bodies, the 3 bodies of the Buddha. Hold on a second, you don't know who Joe Eman is, so somebody might want to send them a message saying that they need to come back another time. These are the 3 bodies of the Buddha, and really what it's describing is the structure of reality, of the world, universe, cosmos, as we experience it, both mental, physical, and spiritual. These 3 bodies of the Buddha. I also sent you an article early on when I first met Trungpa Rinpoche. I accompanied him. Could somebody maybe send a message to Joe Eman, telling him that he needs to come back another time?
Yeah, I'm doing it, John.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks. Yeah. In about 1971 or so, Trungpa Rinpoche had been invited. The reason he came to Boulder, Colorado initially was he'd been invited by some professors at the University of Colorado. And another professor, Bob Lester, I think his name was, who was in charge of the religion department, invited Rinpoche to give a course on Buddhism. And I assisted him in that course. I was his teaching assistant. I helped him I moved the chairs and made announcements to the students and that kind of thing, and listened to the lectures. A few years later, there was an event that took place, maybe 15 or 20 years later, between Naropa and CU, and I was asked by the organizers to write an article about that course. And I wrote this article about the class that I had attended, which had impacted me very profoundly. His lecture on the Trikaya, the 3 bodies of the Buddha, Trikaya. And you have been given that. It was published in a few different places, one of which was Tricycle Magazine, and I think that's the version that you got, the Tricycle article. So I'm going to go through it again, and Michael will as well be making some comments about it. This is probably one of the most profound and deep doctrines in all of Buddhism. The basic idea is that there's sort of two passes that we can take through this material. The first is you might call it the exoteric, the sort of the common pass, and then there's the esoteric or the more mystical pass through this material. So the first way to understand the Trikaya, and we've got somebody who needs to mute themselves or blowing their nose. The first way we can understand this is the three bodies of the Buddha, is that the three bodies are the Dharmakaya, the Sambhogakaya, and the Nirmanakaya. And what that means is the Dharmakaya, Dharma is a word that has many meanings. Really what it means here is either the teachings or the truth. Dharma as truth. Sambhogakaya is usually translated as the enjoyment body of the Buddha, and Nirmanakaya is the manifestation body of the Buddha. Now, in the first pass, what this means is this, that the Dharmakaya were the teachings that the Buddha gave. So, Dan, are you on this one too?
Yep.
Good,
Yep.
thank you. We're getting a lot of people that we don't know showing up. And so the first understanding, you might say the most popular understanding of what these three kayas is, the Dharmakaya is the teachings of the Buddha. That's what Dharma means the Buddha's teachings. So that's that aspect of him. And the Nirmanakaya is the physical form. So you're looking at my Nirmanakaya. I'm looking at your pictures of your Nirmanakaya on the screen. It's the way things present. This glass is a Nirmanakaya. It's a manifestation of physical or in one way or another presentation to the senses of what is real. And the Sambhogakaya is the way in which these physical manifestations communicate. So for instance, the maroon of this sweater, the sounds of these words, the clear quality of this glass with the lemon in it. This is the Sambhogakaya. The object communicates its qualities to us. These are the three sort of ground level understandings of the Trikaya, the three bodies of the Buddha. But then there is a much more sophisticated or version of it, in which the Dharmakaya, this body of teaching, is really the body of reality. Dharma in the sense of reality. And what reality means here is that nothing has any true existence. We think that things actually exist. And yet what the Dharma is saying is that this thing is just a constantly changing apparition, it's just like the image on your computer screen. It never lasts, even for an instant. It's constantly in motion, changing. You can't grasp it. These words come out of my mouth and they're gone immediately. Everything, the six knowables, the sights, sounds, smells, tastes, and bodily sensations, and then mental events, all are arising in the moment, just like these words, passing away and being replaced by the next. This is the Dharmakaya. They call it it's both the womb in the sense of giving birth, the womb of all phenomena, and it's the charnel ground, to use the Indian term. Really it means graveyard, into which everything disappears. This is the Dharmakaya. It's like this open space of this, in which here we are, we're in the midst of space, each one of us. And you move your hand and that gesture is gone. A person comes into your room and says hello and they leave and they're gone. It's a constant womb and charnel ground or graveyard. Oh, J.J. from J.J. Reed. Sorry. I'll let you work with Dan on this. Joseph. Joe. This
Joseph.
Hmm?
Okay. Joseph's gone. J.J. Reed, somebody let him in before. I don't know who it is. Yeah.
Yep. There we go again. So this is the Dharmakaya. It's really, in this sense, in this deeper sense, it's the womb and the graveyard into which phenomena are constantly appearing and disappearing. So as these phenomena arise and disappear, they have a presence, just like, this body, these words. That presence is the Nirmanakaya. And this presence takes many forms. In the first pass, when it's just like a person, the Nirmanakaya, it could be a Buddha, and it comes to teach a person. So the Nirmanakaya is really this form presentation, and it's called the manifestation of compassion. Compassion because we are moved to hold on a second. Moved to be involved, to be responsive, to have feelings for. And so the Nirmanakaya is the compassion body of the Buddha. In a literal sense, for instance, the Tibetan for Nirmanakaya is tulku, a word some of you may recognize. Tulku means a reborn, enlightened person. And many teachers are tulkus. Trungpa Rinpoche was a tulku. He was the 11th reborn Trungpa tulku in his line. The Dalai Lama is a tulku. And what tulkus are, and this is Nirmanakaya, are beings who come back out of compassion for sentient beings, for us confused people, to help us achieve enlightenment and release from samsara, confusion and suffering. So this is another version of Nirmanakaya. In a sense, each one of us is a Nirmanakaya. It's just that somebody let somebody in that they shouldn't have. Who we got? Dan, are you on it?
Yeah, on it.
Okay. Boy, we're getting Zoom bombed a lot. So, Trungpa Rinpoche was a Nirmanakaya, a tulku. So is the Dalai Lama, and I'm sure you know others. But each one of us, in a way, is, in more than in a way, is a Nirmanakaya too. It's just that perhaps we haven't achieved enlightenment yet, but we still have taken rebirth many times, just like the Dalai Lama, just like Trungpa Rinpoche. The difference is only that an enlightened person takes rebirth out of compassion for sentient beings, to come back and help them achieve enlightenment. Whereas we take rebirth, an ordinary human being, speaking for myself, out of the force of karma, confusion, constantly pursuing a better way to be. And then finally, the Sambhogakaya. What the Sambhogakaya is that as things take form, they communicate what they are. So, as I said before, this Nirmanakaya is communicating the pinkness of the skin, the brown of the eyes, the sound of the voice, the pictures in the back of the room. All of these things are communicating colors, shapes, sounds, smells, tastes. The object, the five senses, and mental events are all being communicated in their own style, with their own qualities. This is the Sambhogakaya, and it's called, Sambhogakaya is usually translated as enjoyment body of the Buddha. And what that means is simply that we are appreciating, communicating, enjoying, you might say, the way things present to us. And at a more advanced level, these qualities, we can see them as being utterly unconfused and enlightened. And in that version of the Sambhogakaya, they appear to us as deity. That's a Western word, but like the person on the wall behind me back there, he's a wrathful deity. That's Padmasambhava in his wrathful form, and they appear as yidams. These are tutelary deities. They represent aspects of our enlightened mind. As dharmapalas, those are protectors of the dharma. As all kinds of beings that you and I, ordinary people, don't see, but enlightened people do. And they are really, what they are is manifestations, communications of reality that are very subtle and not available to ordinary human beings, only to people who have begun to approach enlightenment. So, for instance, what they say is that the Dharmakaya, remember the womb, it's the reality body of the Buddha. It's like shunyata. And the Sambhogakaya are only available to bodhisattvas on the bhumis, the stages of the Mahayana path. I think it's about the 7th bhumi up that the individual can begin to see these Sambhogakaya manifestations in the form of yidams and dakinis and dharmapalas and all kinds of things, mahakalas. So these are the 3 bodies of the Buddha. There are 3 aspects of reality. Ultimately, the real meaning of them is that the Dharmakaya is the fact that while nothing seems to exist, yet everything appears. It's constantly coming into appearance and out like that. So there's a slogan that I've repeated before. It says, things appear, and yet they don't exist. They don't have any true being. They're just like images on your computer screen, or images in a mirror, or reflections on water. So things appear, and yet they don't have any true being. They don't have any true being, and yet they appear. This is a slogan that expresses really the 3 kayas. Nirmanakaya, the seeming form of a thing. The Dharmakaya, the fact that it has no true existence, it just is a constant presentation. And the Sambhogakaya, that while it has no true existence, as it seems to appear, it does so luminously, communicatively, constantly, demonstrating its qualities. What obscures this, and this is the path quality of this, is our confusion in our minds. We are constantly seeing the world only in terms of Nirmanakaya. We see it as a collection of things. These things have qualities, but that's no big deal. It's not really, they're not vivid, they're not luminous, they're not communicative in the sense of being meaningful, like the symbols, yidam, dharmapala, and so forth. So what clouds our vision and makes it difficult for us to see the Trikaya is that we are constantly lost in one of 4 problems. The first is that we're judging everything to be good, bad, pleasant, unpleasant, for me, against me. And these judgments cloud our vision. They gray it out. The second is that we see everything in terms of me. We're constantly looking at, what am I going to do this morning? How am I going to have dinner? How am I going to find love? How am I going to be successful or not? How am I going to pay the bills? I. And that again clouds our vision. The third is that everything is the result of causes and conditions. Everything comes together, just like all the conditions that make up this computer screen in this communication. And the fourth has to do with the fact that we tend to get stuck in a kind of ongoing stasis. That is, if things are if you're hungry right now, you're going to continue to be hungry for a while until something changes. And that kind of stuckness, um, it doesn't really appreciate the subtleties of what's going on in any given moment. So these are the things that keep us from seeing the Trikaya. And what begins to happen is that as we tread the path, we begin to move up through the kayas. That is, we start at the ordinary level of the Nirmanakaya, and we see the world as a collection of things, people, like you and me, and our cars, and the trees, and whatever. And then as we move up the path, we begin to contact, and we begin to do practices, especially in the Vajrayana, that put us in contact with the magical aspect of reality, its symbolic qualities, its meaningful, communicative qualities. These practices are what are called creation and completion practices, where we do visualizations of deities and more. And we chant sadhanas and we do mantras and we do all of that. And finally, we move up all the way and understand the reality body of the Buddha. The fact that while none of this has any true existence, yet it's a constant and beautiful and vivid appearing that we can explore, that we can make love to, that we can be in constant communication with. So those are the three bodies of the Buddha. That's what Trungpa Rinpoche taught that day to a bunch of sleepy University of Colorado undergrads. And I'll turn it over to Michael.
Okay, thank you, and welcome everyone. So, in taking this a little bit further, I just want to review a few points from the beginning of the chapter, where Trungpa Rinpoche begins by saying the three kayas are the different subtleties of enlightenment. So with all of this, we're talking about not our ordinary, conventional, habitual experience, but what we might be able to experience when we're able to let go, and not simply be involved with the world of things, but actually be more open in our experience. He describes the state of the Dharmakaya as vacant, which is an interesting way of talking about shunyata, or emptiness, being free of any kind of concept, label, any kind of boundary, you could say. It's an unbounded state. Talks about the Sambhogakaya as the energy level, and the Nirmanakaya as the practical or pragmatic level. So that's what we're working with. And he actually says, in talking about the Dharmakaya, that when our mind is completely with the breath, that is Dharmakaya at the shamatha level. That the breath flows and mind occurs. Between the breath and mind, there's no dichotomy, which is simply in our experience. So what I'd like to do right now is actually take a moment to experience exactly that. I know most people were here for the half-hour of meditation that preceded class, so we won't take a long time. But if everyone could just take a good meditation posture with straight back, upright, but relaxed, and then just simply work with the breath, just as he says. Simply follow the breathing, just a natural breath, nothing special. Identify with the breath, rest with the breath, feel the breath, settle. So that mind and breath are one and the same thing. And I think everyone's familiar. As we breathe out, the breath dissolves into the space around us. And as we identify with the breath, our awareness becomes one with the space as well. So the out-breath connects naturally with relaxing, letting go. And then at the end of the out-breath, there's a simple gap where we let go completely. Out-breath, dissolve, let go. So as we slow down and settle, I want to read just a little bit from a different book, actually, The Wakeful Body by Willa Blythe Baker, about the nature of appearances. Appearances, as they arise for one who knows them, are the play of one's own consciousness, the light of one's own awareness. This is the kind of insight that can emerge when we slow down, sit still, and watch. At first, it seems as if some of these appearances are coming in from the outside. Others, the ones that we call thoughts, feelings, emotions, and perceptions, seem to be coming at us from inside. All of these seem significant for their content, and we're distracted by what we see. But now, imagine that you are just born into this very moment. You are fresh and have forgotten everything you think you used to know. You have forgotten even how to parcel things into categories and significances. You've even forgotten language. Sit still for a few minutes and watch what's happening. Notice how without any effort at all on your part, breath is breathing, heart is beating, skin is tingling, thoughts are thinking, sounds are happening, light is radiating. While you are still, the entire world is unfolding spontaneously and effortlessly, like a magical display. See if you can rest in a state of pure wonder. Can you simply witness it all with no agenda, with no fear, with no need to change a single thing? And still, everything is unfolding of its own accord. This marvelous, spontaneous display springs out of nowhere, with no effort on your part. It is indescribable. A miraculous unfurling of color, sound, smell, thought, and feeling is happening. At a certain point, you realize that what you are really witnessing, this unfurling, is the expression of the mind's inherent energy in your subtle body. It has the power to lead you into a state of wonder. While the display changes, the bright, luminous energy behind the display is constant and ebbing, flowing. To recognize the splendor of the mind's energy as a constant natural flow helps us let go of grasping to all these things out there and in here. Wonder takes our attention away from the conceptuality and its subsequent enmeshment. It takes us away from the endless stories. Wonder is a way of seeing things in their present moment magic. It is a gaze of deep appreciation. So to continue from there, what obscures our ability to witness the Trikaya, things as they are, clear perception of things as they are, an open, basic mind, free of fixation. As Trungpa Rinpoche says, generally we're bound by being unable to see the three kayas as they are. We're veiled by obscurations and anxieties. He says these are like cataracts in our eyes. Generally speaking, most texts usually talk about two veils, one of cognitive obscurations and the other of conflicting emotions. Cognitive obscurations being our tendency to, or actually our ignorance of the true nature of things as being empty, so that we take things as real, solid, definite, things of the world that we can grasp onto. In this particular chapter, Trungpa Rinpoche focuses more on the kleshas, or conflicting emotions, which he terms as nuisance pains that have the quality of unnecessariness. But the two really come together in that if we were able to see the emptiness, the ungraspability, the lack of substantiality to things, then we wouldn't develop the emotionality around them that we do. We wouldn't take them to be real and we wouldn't grasp. So they're one and the same thing in a sense. But these are the two obscurations, conflicting emotions and cognitive obscurations or ignorance. But again, here he's talking about the kleshas or conflicting emotions, which he says are developed through the 8 states of consciousness. So we actually read about the 8 states of consciousness before in one of the chapters in the Path of Individual Liberation. But here he's talking about how we develop emotionality around our perceptions of things. So the 8 states of consciousness begin with the 5 sense consciousnesses: sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch, or bodily sensations. And so what we're taking here is sort of, in a simplistic way, you could say, sort of working from the outside inward, although ultimately it's non-dual. We'll come back to that in a moment. But this is how we tend to think of our experience. So this is how we get confused or get caught up in duality, that we see things that we perceive that we believe are outside of us, that we take to be other. And as he says, we become fixated and fascinated by the things that we see in our 5 senses, the things that we hear through our 5 senses: taste, smell, taste, and touch. And from that, we develop grasping, aversion, and attachment, which comes with the other senses. He actually says these are natural animal instincts and seem to be very basic. If we were to study the 8 states of consciousness in depth, it would be pointed out that in their fundamental nature, the 5 sense consciousness are non-conceptual, but it's actually the 6th consciousness that brings in and beyond, that bring in the notion of concepts. But he talks about them as natural animal instincts, really emphasizing different ways in the chapter how animals experience the world. But the word that he uses over and over is automatic, that the sense perceptions are automatic, meaning that they're spontaneous and without thought. So again, in a sense, non-conceptual. The 6th consciousness is mind consciousness. And this goes with perceptions of mental events, the actual perception of thoughts and feelings by the mind. And he says this is what dictates our policy towards the 5 senses: sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. And does this by asking, are these perceptions temporarily good? Are they fundamentally good? So this is, we're moved beyond just a purely automatic reaction or perception of things to beginning to evaluate or label and judge. The 6th consciousness, the mental consciousness, he says, edits the first 5. And I think the word edit is interesting here because it actually gives 2 meanings. One is that we're beginning to develop some kind of opinion or feeling toward things. But it's also that because of how we do this, we don't actually see things as they are, but we begin to both exaggerate and ignore different characteristics of things. We pay a lot of attention to some things and no attention at all to others. So it's also editing in the sense of drawing out and also cutting away, in a sense, you could say. The 7th consciousness is which he calls klesha consciousness. This is where we actually begin to develop the reference points for kleshas. In some texts, the 7th consciousness is called the afflicted consciousness, but he calls it here the klesha consciousness, which he says does the final editorial job and declares that this is good and this is bad. So at this point, we have beginning to have fairly solid ideas about self and other, and how we want to relate to other in terms of perceiving things as good, bad, or the third choice being indifferent, things that we neither see as good or bad, pleasurable or unpleasurable. And we develop the idea that we should stick with the pleasurable. And then he says that the 8th consciousness, this is a final, as he calls this a final sorting out, the 7th consciousness, is a final sorting out that relates with all the six previous consciousnesses. And because of that editorial process, the kleshas are manifested. So again, we come to fairly solid ideas about ourselves here and some kind of a world out there. And he says here that the term klesha, as it's used here, isn't necessarily used in reference to the primary kleshas: passion, aggression, and ignorance. But really, he says really the klesha consciousness simply makes reference points. Again, it's this sorting out of I and other in terms of good and bad. It acts as the spokesperson, he says, as the intelligence that knows how to sort things out. So this is, again, how we can begin to see how the five sense consciousnesses, in a sense, are non-conceptual. It's said, for instance, that the eye consciousness, vision, in its simplest form, just sees color and form. But what happens is we label that over. We decide that something is a beautiful sight, a desirable sight, or an unpleasant sight. And all of that comes out of the sixth and seventh consciousness as he's presenting it here. The final consciousness is the Alaya consciousness, or actually the Alaya Vijnana, which is the eighth consciousness. And he says that after we've done this sorting out process through the seventh consciousness, that information is stored in the Alaya Vijnana, which is the last of the eight consciousnesses. The Alaya Vijnana is sometimes called the storehouse consciousness because, as he says, it becomes like a bank of memory, a bank of habitual patterns. As he says, we remember we used to like this, therefore we should pursue it, and we dislike that, therefore we should not pursue this. So in that way, we keep referring back at all the time to the Alaya Vijnana. He also compares it to being like a library with all kinds of index cards. Of course, nowadays we have computers, so index cards are a thing of the past, but I know what he means. That we collect information on what's good, what's bad, what should be cultivated, what shouldn't be cultivated. It's, as he says, it's a collection of all the discoveries we've made because we have sight and all the other senses. And he says that this combination of the eight consciousnesses is what supports the working of the kleshas altogether. So I think it's probably more helpful to think of the eight consciousnesses in this sense as activity rather than as solid things, that they're actually processes of things that we go through. And it's through this process of taking things in on the sensory level, developing concepts, feelings, and ideas about them on the level of the other consciousnesses that we develop kleshas. And that this involvement with all this intentionality and with definite sense of I here and these things out there that I see as good, bad, or whatever, that this totally obscures our ability to relate to the three kayas because we get caught up, as John said, in the world of things. We have solid, definite ideas about what we want and what we don't want and so on. I should also say that it's interesting that if we go back and actually read the presentation that Trungpa Rinpoche gives in the Path of Individual Liberation, this process also works the other way, that the seeds or this information, the habitual patterns, probably the best word I can think of in Western psychology is Jung's notion of archetypes. The karmic seeds or imprints that we build up in the Alaya Vijnana also act, he says, as instigators, that they actually instigate. And it's this instigation that leads to the development of the seventh consciousness, and then to relating to the six consciousnesses and the sense consciousnesses from the point of view of the development of ego. And that it's traditionally said that what happens is the seventh consciousness, which again develops out of this instigation, the karmic momentum, the habituation of the eighth consciousness, looks back at the eighth consciousness and takes it as some kind of a self, and then looks out through the six consciousnesses, and in particular the five sense consciousnesses, and sees some kind of other. But in either case, we end up dealing with what we believe to be a world of solid things, as opposed to realizing that they're all creations of mind, which is why I wanted to do the reading along with the meditation before, because it really points out how it's really what we're always experiencing. It's just the innate awareness of mind. It's just that we don't recognize the true nature of awareness. We don't recognize this ability to just fully be awake, and that it's this energy, this current, this awareness of wakefulness that really is illuminates the whole display and is the whole display. In any case, the next section talks about transcending the eight consciousnesses. And he begins by talking about different ways that he's talked about mind that is beyond Alaya Vijnana, either absolute bodhicitta, or the basic goodness of Alaya. So not Alaya Vijnana, but Alaya itself is the mind before there's any kind of division into I and other, any kind of getting caught up in duality. And he says that the absolute bodhicitta, or the basic goodness of Alaya, transcends all these reference points that we develop through the 8 consciousnesses, that they're beyond memory, beyond the Alaya Vijnana, and all the habitual patterns and habitual feelings and habitual intentions that we store up there. He says that the Alaya is all that is beyond memory. He describes as somewhat naive, meaning kind of natural and unsophisticated, that it doesn't care about securing or not securing, that it's just cognitive mind, just awareness, that is very close to the nature of Sugata Garbha, which is another term that literally means those who have gone joyfully. But Sugata Garbha is also beyond memory, and this is what allows us to make a connection with the Guru and with the oral instructions of the Guru, and that state of mind is the connection that allows us to discover the possibility of Trikaya. So we're going back to just bare awareness, bare wakefulness, the basic openness, mind without fixation, and that this is what allows us to discover the possibility of the Trikaya. And then he says we cannot just, begins talking about synchronizing past, present, and future. And he says that we can't just say that synchronizing past, present, and future is a problem. We have to be careful and precise. We know that the past occurred because of memory, that the present exists because of uncertainty, and that the future is reflected because of fear or aggression or wanting. And normally we're not clear on that at all. And I think that we can actually contemplate that sentence at great length. And of course, being me, I went back and read the transcript, and this is actually comes out of some questions and answers between him and students. But I think we can actually contemplate that sentence. We probably could give a whole talk on it all by itself. We know that the past occurred because of memory, that the present exists because of uncertainty, and that the future is reflected because of fear or aggression or wanting. And this is what we're able to see if we are mindful, aware, careful, and precise, as he says. Because most often we don't realize that we're projecting past memory onto the present, that we end up actually recreating our past in the present over and over. We don't often recognize that we take the future, thoughts about the future as solid, and get ourselves all worked up because we don't realize that we're projecting hopes and fears, or as he says, fear, aggression, or wanting into the future. And we don't relate with the uncertainty or ungraspability of the present. We're always trying to find some reference point to secure ourselves. So there's actually quite a bit that can be said, about that sentence. But we'll continue. So he says, when we see the past, present, and future, we see the possibilities in all of them, and we don't panic. In other words, we're able to relate with the uncertainty or the ungraspability of the present. And we don't make it into some kind of a game. We can just cut our thoughts and try to relate with absolute bodhicitta. Just relate with open mind, awareness, being on the spot. And according to this, we can then move into talking about realizing the Trikaya. So this is realizing the Trikaya. And he says, according to the Vajrayana, every journey we make through the entire path is based on the Trikaya. It's based on the achievement of the perfect Trikaya principle. The basic physical state, which again he talked about as being the practical or pragmatic aspect, or Nirmanakaya. The manifestation, which is Sambhogakaya, which he talked about as energy before. And finally, the fundamental non-fixation and non-duality of I and other, which is described as vacant. Most often you'll hear that as empty or shunyata, but vacant altogether. And this is the other reason why I wanted to read that section, do the meditation that we did and read that section, because I think when we're really able to relax into gap, when we're really able to settle the mind and let go, what we see is, on the one hand, our experience is empty of concept and label, and yet at the same time, it's actually full of everything that we can experience directly in terms of perceptions and the world around us. And in fact, that's what he's going to be talking about in just a few minutes in this chapter. He says the three kayas are persons we can actually communicate with, that such communication is not theoretical. It's communicating with things we actually possess. And I read this. I thought it was interesting that he talked about the three kayas as persons, but then it says we actually possess them. And it'll go on so that that's actually intrinsic to us. But I think a lot of times, because we tend to approach this material and this idea conceptually, we do think of them as something out there, something separate from us. But the more we relate to them, the more we relate to them, the more we realize they are us. And that we actually can learn quite a bit by relating to ourselves, relating to our capacity to experience these things in that way. He says the teachings are taught to us by the three kayas, these three Buddha-like natures, which also happen to be in tune with ourselves, that it's a natural phenomena that takes place within us. He says it's like being attracted to food if we're hungry. Perceiving the three kayas is natural. So again, this is not an experience we'll have if we try to relate to three kayas as concepts, as something external to us, as things. But if we actually look at our experience, particularly our experience in meditation practice, where it's much easier to make this kind of recognition, when we're able to do that, when we can recognize our awake openness, energy, and practicality, then we experience the three kayas. Because they arise within our existence, he says, we don't have to strain ourselves in order to relate with the Buddha Dharma in any way. And he says that altogether the Vajrayana teachings are connected with our intrinsic outlook, our intrinsic being. So again, we're talking about something that's there, here, in us, but that we most often don't recognize because of the two veils that we talked about before. He talks about self-liberation or wrongdraw, which we actually see, the self-liberation in those moments in meditation where we just naturally come back. We can begin with the intention of opening to present moment awareness or working with the breath and dissolving into awareness. And then suddenly we're planning a vacation, we're worried about paying bills or wherever our mind goes. But then at some point we realize that we've become caught up in thought. And in that moment, we're back in awareness. So that's self-liberation. It wasn't, there's really no effort in it, except perhaps the very tiny effort involved in being willing to let go at that point and stay with the experience as opposed to getting back into thought again. He says, as we practice the best alaya, there are possibilities of recognizing the Trikaya. We see that we can go beyond the neurosis of our 8 states of consciousness. And he says that we do this in steps. That first we begin to hamper the schemes and products of the 8th consciousness. So what we're talking about here is beginning to recognize and abandon habitual reactive mind, which we ordinarily do by following thought after thought and endless kinds of struggles and dramas and comedies and tragedies of all kinds. And it's easier to come to recognize in meditation practice is we begin to allow ourselves to rest in the gaps, or nowness, you could say, rather than continuing to refer back to memory and the 8th consciousnesses. And with that, I actually wanted to read another excerpt. This is from a different teacher, Tulku Ujin, about this notion of gap, because it's or just being able to rest in present awareness is another way to describe it. In this immediacy, in other words, in this moment of nowness, past thought has already vanished and the future thought has not yet arrived. Don't follow up the present thought with another one, a new one. That is what sentient beings do, endlessly adding a new thought to the present one. When there is no adding of another thought, the link is broken, and that moment is free of the 3 times. There is no past, present, or future, no following up of the present. When we're free of constructs of the 3 times, that in itself is pure awareness, the nature of mind. So, and we experience this in meditation practice, maybe very briefly and for very brief moments of time, but we have these experiences. So in this way, we hamper the schemes and products of the 8th consciousness. We disrupt the instigation, you could say, of the 8th consciousness. Then he says we realize the 7th consciousness, the mind that edits, can be overcome. And as we slow down, as we're able to rest in gaps, we begin to, from time to time, actually see things as they are, rather than in their edited form, the conceptual form. We begin to notice more of the world around us. And he says, because we can overcome the mind that edits, we begin to touch our sixth consciousness, or sense-conscious mind, which acts as spokesman for the five consciousnesses: sight, hearing, smell, taste, and feeling. We begin to overcome their fixations and their grasping quality. We're able to let go. We're able to separate out, not take everything all at once, but actually begin to see each specific thing, hear each specific thing, feel each specific thing, just as it is. We begin to see we begin to understand, we begin to see how we overlay our experience of things by projecting labels and judgments based on habitual patterns. And as we practice, there's less and less obscuration of conceptual mind, less and less obscuration of the kleshas. He says when we go back through all 8 consciousnesses, it doesn't mean that we cease to see, hear, taste, smell, or feel. In fact, all these capabilities, our vision, hearing, and so on, become doubled and tripled. They're sharper because there's no message running back and forth trying to see, is this good? Is this bad? The messenger no longer exists, so our perceptions become very direct. We begin to see true color and hear true sounds. We begin to appreciate the vividness of the phenomenal world. Interestingly, in the transcript in this talk, it's pointed out separately that this is Sambhogakaya experience. This is the body of enjoyment. We experience this in moments in our practice. And he goes on to say that because we're not involved in defending our territory, and this comes out of more Mahayana practice of not habitually putting ourselves first and our ability to exchange self for other, that we begin to like the phenomenal world. We begin to develop maitri and compassion. And again, in the transcript, this is more Nirmanakaya experience, how we can actually manifest in the world from this point of view. We develop an open heart. And he also goes on to say we appreciate the root guru because the guru has shown us this vivid world completely. And with this, as we have these experiences, and this goes back again to how some experience of the Trikayas teaches us, he says we're actually able to see the Dharma as not an alien teaching, but a real teaching. We can actually perceive the Dharmic world altogether, and therefore we can see that all thought patterns as Dharmakaya, free from preconceptions of any kind. We begin to have a clear understanding, and that experience of clear understanding, in the context of this chapter, is known as transmission. In transmission, the mind of the teacher is transmitted clearly to the student, properly and without obstacles. So this leads to the final point in the chapter, the meaning of minds. The idea, where he says that the idea of 8 states of consciousness may seem somewhat complicated, and even theoretical. But once we understand the case history of the 8 states of consciousness, how they evolve, how they become fixated, how they become solidified, and more importantly, how we can undo them step by step, this idea will become more real. In other places, this is what he's talked about, where we actually, through hearing, contemplating, and meditating, make a real personal connection with the teachings, identify with the teachings as personal experience. So we actually can see this not as a conceptual experience, but we actually see it with the mind of now. We actually come to understand something of how, for instance, perception becomes distorted by labels and judgments of all kinds. We see with the mind, we see with Vipassana awareness. So once we have this basic understanding of kleshas and of anxiety, and have some understanding of suffering and how that arises and how it functions, then we begin to see that this state of mind can be altered and worked with. We see that although there may be habitual patterns happening all along, this is again as the working, what arises out of it rises out of the 8th consciousness, but it's actually our way of relating to the entire experience, that those habitual patterns can be braided and punctured. We see beyond the world of our kleshas. And with this kind of openness, with this kind of experience of unfixated mind, energy, communication, enjoyment or appreciation of the world, and just pragmatic being in the world, and an open, gentle way, that transmission is possible. And he says the word for transmission is notro, I think that's how you pronounce it, which translates as introducing the face. So again, we're back to talking about recognition. What's pointed out to us so that we can recognize it is ultimately our own face, in the sense that transmission is showing you the absolute possibility that when you open yourself through shamatha vipassana training and lojong practice, you can actually transcend unnecessary pain and anxiety. We can achieve, he says, we can achieve the precision of the best of alaya, the best of the basic fundamental mind, aware, awake mind. And through that, we can meet the transcendent, awake, and joyful mind of the guru. And then, to our surprise, we realize that our mind and the guru's mind are the same. And he closes by saying the first stage is obviously the awareness of I and other, I being the student and other being the teacher. But in the second stage, the next flash, you realize that I and other are one, not two. But that's the definition of transmission. And it's out of that that we can practice Vajrayana disciplines of all kinds. So I think we've said a lot, but we have some time for discussion and comments.
I want to say too, about the eight consciousnesses. These aren't things that exist in some way. They are really different aspects of awareness. The fact that we see forms, hear sounds, think thoughts, that we have memories stored in the eighth consciousness, which is really just a storehouse. These are just different aspects of mind. Kind of like, if you were talking the blind man and the elephant, and one feels the leg and says it's like a tree, and another feels the side and says, oh no, it's like a house, and so forth. So these are the different aspects of mind, you would say, these eight consciousnesses. Is that a mind stopper?
Sarah has her hand raised.
Oh, good.
So when we engage in an activity that creates a lot of thoughts and emotions, should we pursue that activity to practice wearing out the kleshas and using the slogans in the practice, or should we avoid it?
I think you should bring awareness. One should. The instruction would be to bring awareness to it. But I mean, sometimes if it's just too upsetting, you might have to distance yourself from it for a while. Or too emotional. What do you think, Michael?
Yeah, I was thinking along the same lines. I mean, Hinayana teachings are sort of more along the lines of if something is just causing us to become wild and mindless, that we're better off abandoning that. But Vajrayana teachings and somewhat Mahayana really are more like what John's talking about, where we try to remain in a state of awareness, see what's happening in our mind, and not get swept away, not lose our seat. So yeah, we have to be kind to ourselves and not try to do more than what we're capable of doing.
But definitely, the teachings get more advanced. They say that these kinds of things that upset us are opportunities to awaken by seeing them as they truly are, instead of rejecting them and fighting with them.
And actually, now that as I think about your question, one thing I forgot to say is we actually experienced the four kayas before, the three kayas, actually four kayas before, when we read the Lojong slogans. If you remember the slogans, I think it's a chapter about bringing difficult circumstances to the path in the Mahayana text. Seeing confusion as the four kayas is the supreme shunyata protection. You might find it interesting to go back and read that particular slogan in the Mahayana text.
Thank you.
When Michael refers to the four kayas, the fourth kaya is called the kaya of own being, svabhava kaya. And what it means is that the three kayas are really in a unity. They aren't separate. They're all different aspects of this. And that has, they call that the own being kaya, the unity of the other three.
So I guess Lane and then Robert.
Yes, along the same line as what John was said a little while ago. I'm wondering if the whole purpose of this teaching is to see that everything is consciousness. Everything is part of a single consciousness. What do you think? Well, where's this trying to point us, if not that?
Well, this isn't a doctrine of single consciousness. What it's trying to point us to is cutting through our habitual patterns and our distortions of the various types that cloud our vision of reality. And it's showing us, trying to describe what reality, if you can even call it that, what it really is, which is these three kayas, these three modulations of what we are in the middle of right now. But it's certainly not an idea of one mind. That's Yogacara, and we're not there. Chittamatra mind.
Yeah, I mean, didn't you say earlier on that nothing is separate? Isn't that what this is trying to say in a way?
What do you mean nothing is separate? Nothing has any true existence.
Right. There's no I and other.
So
there's no separation.
Well, there's no issue of separation or non-separation. That only comes about when you've got discrete entities.
Okay, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
You're welcome. We had a hand up. Robert Sulecki.
Yes, I got a question. Can the emotions cause physical manifestation? Because I've had experiences with extreme emotions coming through that weren't quite my own. And when it happened, I saw physical objects actually disappear. And I'm feeling that now as I've grown further, as I get more control of my mind, it doesn't happen as much, and I have control over when it happens and when it doesn't happen.
I'm not sure I understand your question.
So I'm trying to understand if the emotions, like I've had experience where when my emotions have gotten strong, physical manifestations would occur. And I guess what I'm trying to understand is, are the emotions related to that? Do the emotions affect the physical world in that way?
I don't think so.
Well, I think there is a physical component to emotions. I mean, it's, there's a, mind and body aren't separate emotion. There's an emotional experience in our bodies as well as in our mind. It's actually all one thing, but we can kind of conceptually, this is body, this is mind, but it's really all one experience. But when we're really involved emotionally, there's also physical feelings and sensations that go with it.
Yeah. I feel that when I meditate, I get less emotion and I feel better.
Because we tend to settle down and we get less caught up in the energy and on the body mind level.
Thank you, Michael.
Graham, you had your hand up, I think.
Yeah. Hi. The question came up for me in this discussion. Where does our experience come from? And so I was perplexed about how the kayas converge, the Trikaya converges to create the causes and conditions that manifest as our human experience. So illusory as our experience is. So, so thinking out of the box for a minute, when I was, kind of thinking about this, has anyone compared the generation of human experience and the flow of the Trikaya with the creation of a hologram? In terms of Lojong, it would be all the seemingly physical and emotional dharmas would be regarded as holograms. Do you know what holograms are? You know what holograms are.
Yeah, I know what holograms are.
Fine. Dreams would be, you'd put the word, you'd think of holograms rather than dreams, or, as a synonym for dreams. Did anyone ever explore that?
Not that I know of.
No, nor I. But it's an interesting metaphor in the sense that with holograms as well, there's something that appears, and yet at the same time, it's not tangible.
Absolutely.
And so, it's another way of kind of getting at the dreamlike or illusion-like quality of, things, how things exist, or whether. Also, your question about where experience comes from. If you go back again and read Trungpa Rinpoche's explanation of the Lojong slogan that I was mentioning earlier, seeing confusion as the four kayas as the supreme shunyata expression, he actually talks about that as looking at where the thoughts come from, where did they go, and where did they disappear. And his whole point is that thoughts just emerge. And more importantly, they just disappear. There's no way of saying where they go. And it really gets at they're in a very immediate sense, if we really look with the mind of now, the ungraspability of experience.
And as we're going to encounter when we read further, all of our experience appears out of nowhere, disappears into nowhere, has no recognizable beginning or end, origin or cessation. It's just a constantly changing presentation in the present moment. This goes for ourselves as well, our own lives. You can never find the beginning. We might go back many, many births, rebirths, never find the beginning or the end. Because there is nothing that is actually born or died.
Okay.
That's the doctrine. Would you say, Michael?
Yeah. I have to read a little more on holograms. It's an interesting analogy, I think.
It is.
Yeah, well, in terms of the Trikaya, the creation of a world would go like this. It would follow the scheme of ground, path, and fruition. Yeshe, which was one of your other talks, or that I, listened to, is the first pure light, the ground. And then Rupa, Yeshe, might be seen as the single coherent light beam, which is the ground element necessary to generate a holographic experience. And then you have a second stage in the creation of experiential hologram, which might be, this is me thinking out of the box, which is analogous to path. To make a hologram, this primordial coherent laser beam travels a path and passes through like a prism or something that breaks it into three separate new beams. This creates a 3D image from the original primordial single beam. but it is not a hologram yet because it has not been projected on the screen of life appearances yet. So this is the next step. And so then there's this is following this analogy. So there's enough depth at the third step. There's enough depth and dimension in these holograms to generate a location for human experience. And our lives are the screens or the space that the process of ground and path have made possible under the kind of guidance of this holographic analogy.
Interesting.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm also thinking though that like in other, sometimes in teachings it'll talk about the illusion-like or dream-like quality to experiences, but it's not saying that they are an illusion. It's just they're illusion-like. In other words, it's pointing to something, not a solid thing in itself.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
that would be, yeah, great. A hologram is definitely a hologram, and you go like, hey, you experience it, but it's not there. It's kind of interesting. It fits.
Mark has his hand up.
Hi. I was just wondering, did Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche used to speak of that there was nothing that exists, that no past, well, I mean, not just Chogyam Trungpa, but everybody, that this is pretty much a basic understanding that at some level nothing exists. There's no past, there's no present, there's no future. Didn't he say the present is a lie, I believe? Anyway, I was just wondering, we do experience something, and I have no doubt it's not necessary. What we experience is not an actual portrayal of what is, happening on every level. But do we can we consider that kind of magic? I mean, we have no understanding of everything we see and everything we experience, and yet we do experience it. And I've never heard any real explanation of how anything really exists, from the scientists or anybody, or Buddhism for that matter. Why anything? So, and yet we do experience something amazing. And I just was wondering, have there ever been any discussions of the magic of just experiencing the moment?
Absolutely. That's what the Trikaya is really about. It is saying that in any moment, things seem to have a presence. That presence communicates its qualities, and it has no real existence. It's constantly appearing and disappearing before you can even point to what it was that appeared and disappeared. And it's that very fact that the impermanence of it, the fact that it's appearing and disappearing, that allows it to communicate the qualities and the seeming sense of presence. And that this is all very magical. This is our being. But we tend to concretize everything and turn it into a name, a thing. And in doing that, we remove the magic. We dull it out. We make ourselves insensitive. So they say that, as you enter the true state of mind, it's very seductive, it's very pleasurable and full of joy. And in fact, the last stage of it is often described as bliss. And that in the first stage, you understand that things have no true existence. In the second stage, you begin to see how colorful and beautifully they present having no true existence. And in the third stage, you experience extreme joy and beauty, love for this world.
Thank you.
Is that fair, Michael? Is that a fair description of the path in terms of the three kayas? I think you're going to really like this book that we're going to do, Mind at Ease by Trikaya Rinpoche. He was really quite good. He died very young, in his 50s, early 50s. And he came and taught here in Boulder, among other places. He was a tremendous admirer of Trungpa Rinpoche. In fact, the story goes that he had collected many transcripts and recordings of Trungpa Rinpoche, and he expressed that in his talks, that he, thought so highly of him and took him as an example. And he gave some wonderful talks here in Boulder many years ago. Anybody else? Gosh, we're almost at time. That's amazing.
Oh, Philip?
Sure, thank you. So sometimes people talk about the rainbow body. Is that the Sambhogakaya?
I think so. Michael?
I think so also. And it's something that, some teachers apparently are able to manifest at the time of death.
Well, let me back up on that. There is a specific teaching about the rainbow body. You see, this has to do with Dzogchen, the Great Perfection teachings. And in the Dzogchen path, there are basically two approaches to enlightenment. The first is very synchronous with what we are studying now, and especially what we will be studying in Mind at Ease. And it's called cutting through to original purity. But the second has to do with seeing the Sambhogakaya world. It's called the Bardo of reality. And when one sees that, if one achieves enlightenment in the Bardo of reality, and really, especially there are certain stages, 4 main stages in the Bardo of reality of seeing it. And then there's a 5th stage, which is beyond. And if you achieve those stages perfectly, which very few people have ever done, you achieve the rainbow body, it's called. Padmasambhava achieved the rainbow body. Vimala Mitra achieved the rainbow body, and there are some others as well. And if you do, they say, and I don't understand this, they say that you live on. And in fact, Padmasambhava is living on an island off the coast of Jambudvipa. You see, in the ancient geography, the world was flat, right? And the center of it was this huge landmass called Jambudvipa. And we, human beings, live in the southern part of Jambudvipa. And it's surrounded by 4 big and 8 smaller islands. 4 big and 4 smaller islands, one of which is called Chamara. And there, Padmasambhava lives on today and comes to visit us occasionally. And he lives on the copper-colored mountain. It's a copper-colored mountain, and at the top I won't go into all the symbolism. Vimala Mitra lives on an actual mountain that exists in China called Wutaishan. Wutaishan literally means 5-peaked mountain. And supposedly the Bodhisattva Maitreya also lives there too. And every 100 years, Vimala Mitra takes human birth to come back and make sure that the Dzogchen, the Great Perfection teachings, haven't fallen into whatever, that they're still alive and well. And there are different stories about who was the reincarnation, most recent reincarnation of Vimala Mitra. And I really can't sort that one out, so I won't repeat that. But this all has to do with achieving the rainbow body, which is supposedly the ultimate achievement of the Great Perfection teachings, which are the highest point of the Vajrayana. There's a bit of lore for you. Well, it's 6:56, and maybe we ought to end.
Steve has his hand up. Steve.
Oh, sorry. Last question, Steve.
Okay, just a quick one. I was just wondering, would it be fair to describe this as studying awareness itself and breaking it down into its various components?
I think that's going to come. This is a little bit different. This is really talking about the structure of reality. And by reality, I mean when seen through the eyes of clear eyes, not obscured with confusion and ignorance. That this is the way the world appears in terms of the three bodies of the Buddha. And what obscures it, or really one way of talking about that, what obscures it is the eight consciousnesses. What do you say, Michael?
Yeah. Although I think some of this does fit, I think, with what Steve's saying. I mean, it's maybe not components, but qualities or aspects. Qualities, maybe.
Right.
I don't know, the three bodies always struck me as so cosmic. It's like they're describing the cosmos beyond space and time, beyond here and there, now and then, present, future.
Mm-hmm.
It's very magical.
Okay, thank you.
Well, is Meg still here? Yes, she is. You want to lead us in the closing chants? I'll put them up.
We'll close with a prayer for peace, and then we'll dedicate the merit earned by our practice for the benefit of all sentient beings. By the blessings of enlightened and compassionate ones, by the power of my positive actions of 3 times and my prayers of pure aspiration, may wars, conflicts, epidemics, and all other maladies dissolve in this world, and may the earth and all who live on this earth enjoy the abundance of well-being. May all learn to live lovingly with each other. By this merit may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy of wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great East, may the lotus garden of the Rigdom's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, John. Thanks, Michael.
Everyone.
Everyone, thank you, Michael, John.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Take care, everyone.
Good to see you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Right.
Michael,
Thank
Yeah.
you.
that's really getting into heavy, deep waters.
Yes,
Beautiful stuff. But
it's great. Yeah.
rainbow body. When he said that, I was so tuned into the Trikaya, it just didn't register. But I mean, this is what I've been studying, the Dzogchen path. And the rainbow body is what I said it is, Padmasambhava, Vimalamitra, and some others, I guess, who have achieved it. Like some of Padmasambhava's disciples, evidently, achieved it. The translator, his name, I forget, Bharatsana, and he may have achieved the rainbow body, some others. But it's such an odd idea that they are not going to die.
Yeah, I know. And this just, yeah. Well, I guess on the level of awareness, we never die either. So, but at the same time, that's not how I experience things.
That's a thought. But I don't know, it seems different. Padmasambhava comes back.
That's a whole other thing. Yeah, I know. It's sort of like I realized once, if, of course, it's an impossibility. I was thinking once, even if I met a previous incarnation of me, I wouldn't know that's what it was.
Yeah, and then there's Vajra Hell, which is coming up, I think.
How far away in these talks?
I mean, when he introduced that, we all went, "What? What? What about impermanence?"
I know. And what do you mean it's only two choices? And how do you know you're going the wrong way? And then once you're in the tube the wrong way, what do you do? I know it's a scary metaphor. Anyway, I'll see you tomorrow.
Okay, bye.